Let's be honest, this was bound to happen. Not because it's right, but because it exposes a reality people pretend doesn't exist. South Africa loves to act progressive on paper. I'm talking the pride flags, hashtags, corporate logos changing colors every June. But the streets, the communities, the actual people, they are not buying it, and neither am I. Mushin Hendricks, the world's first openly gay imam, was more than a religious figure. He was a challenge to the status quo. And in a country like South Africa, where cultures, religions, and identities constantly clash, that challenge was like walking into a lion's den with raw meat strapped to your chest like Daniel in the Bible. Let's not sugarcoat this. A huge part of the Muslim community never accepted Hendricks. Not quietly disagreed, they downright rejected the man because Islam, like many traditional religions, doesn't bend to the Western ideas of sexuality, which is good. And South Africa, for all its Rainbow Nation branding, is still deeply traditional at its core value. The killing itself was horrific, no excuses, no justifications. But what's equally disturbing is the silence from the same voices that were supporting the man. The president, the religious leaders, carefully tiptoeing out of the room as everyone argues. The CRL Commission, the group meant to promote the religious and cultural rights, has barely made a peep. Why? Because this case forces them to pick sides between their progressive image and the deeply rooted values of the communities they claim to represent. And the silence speaks volumes. Because if South Africa truly embraced the LGBTQIA+ community, we wouldn't just mourn Hendricks. People would be marching, demanding justice, forcing the government's hand. But here we are, watching the story fade into dust from the headlines Stano style, while politicians shuffle papers and hope everyone moves on. And the truth is, SA is not as woke as it pretends to be. And you know that. South Africa is not a woke country, despite pretending like they are. And that has been exposed with this killing. Now, before anyone gets emotional and starts typing in angry comments, I want to break this down properly. Because if we're going to talk about the Hendricks situation, we need to talk about everything. We need to talk about the man, we need to talk about his message, the reaction, and the hypocrisy. All of it. To understand the weight of this situation, you've got to understand exactly who Mushin Hendricks was. He wasn't just some random dude preaching from a TikTok account about how every Muslim can be gay. This man was a fully qualified imam, studied at a traditional Islamic school, knew the Quran like the back of his hand. He was legit until he came out as gay. And that's where the story really begins. Because in the eyes of many Muslims, both in South Africa and globally, being gay and being imam don't mix. Oil and water, haram and halal. Pick any metaphor you want. That point stays the same, and you know it. He wasn't just bending the rules. He was snapping them in half and throwing the pieces into the fire. But Hendricks did not back down. The man built an inner circle of his, an organization meant to support LGBTQ+ Muslims. He gave speeches, did interviews, wrote articles, and while the Western media applauded him as this brave trailblazer, many South Africans, especially South African Muslims, saw him as a threat, not just to religious doctrine, but to cultural stability as we know it. Look, South African Muslims are not monolithic. Some supported Hendricks quietly. They were respecting his courage, even if they disagreed with exactly what he was standing for. Others were loud in the condemnation. And then there was the largest group, the silent majority, the ones who didn't say much publicly, but nodded along when someone called them misguided or astray. It's not hard to see why either. Islam, like many faiths, has clear stances on sexuality. And unlike Western countries where societal norms are shifting faster than TikTok trends, religious communities still hold the line. For many Muslims, Hendricks wasn't just preaching acceptance, he was rewriting theology. And in South Africa, a country already balancing on a tightrope of cultural and racial tensions, that is dangerous ground. Because when you challenge deeply held beliefs, you're not just debating, you are shaking the foundation people have built their lives on. And now here's where things get really interesting. Because after Hendricks' death, you'd expect a flood of statements, right? Condemnation from the president, marches, outrage from the religious leaders, pride marches, emotional activists and press conferences about tolerance and peace. Guess what happened? Nothing. Crickets. Even the CRL Rights Commission, whose entire job is to protect and promote cultural and religious rights, gave the weakest possible response. And the president, nothing solid, just vague words about senseless violence with zero commitment to actual action. Why? Because South Africa's leaders are stuck between two narratives because they can't make a damn decision. On one side, you've got the progressive, Western-facing image they like to protect or project, rainbow flags, pride parades, corporate inclusivity workshops, the whole package. On the other side, you've got the reality, a country still deeply rooted in conservative values, still traditional, where many communities, black, colored, Indian, white, are not buying into this woke agenda the Western world is trying to give us. So what do politicians do? They do what they always do. Play both sides, say just enough to avoid backlash, but never enough to actually commit to change and stay on one side. It's performative politics at its finest, social engineering at its finest. This isn't just about one man or one community. Hendrick's death is a symptom of a much bigger issue, South Africa's identity crisis. On one hand, we want to be seen as this progressive beacon of modernity in South Africa. On the other hand, we are clinging to our traditional values like a drowning man holding onto a raft. And when those two forces collide, it's the people stuck in the middle, like Hendricks, who suffer. Think about it. We've got a constitution that protects LGBTQIA plus rights, but how many LGBTQIA plus people actually feel safe in the townships, rural areas, or even some urban communities? How many queer South Africans are hiding their identities because they know coming out could mean rejection from their families, or worse? Hendricks was an outlier, a public figure who refused to hide, and in a country still grappling with its identity, that made him one hell of a target. Now here's the part no one wants to admit. Nothing is going to change. There's gonna be some articles, a few think pieces, maybe even some short-lived hashtag, but real change, accountability, justice, don't make me laugh. Because South Africa's system isn't built for justice, it's built for survival. Politicians survive on avoiding controversy. Religious leaders survive on keeping their congregations happy. And communities survive by sticking to what they know, even if it means ignoring the ugly parts of society. The people who killed Mushin Hendricks, they'll probably never see the inside of a courtroom. And the politicians who should be pushing for justice, well, they are already moving on to the next headline. So what's the lesson here? What should you learn from here? It's not just about Hendricks. It's about the lie we keep telling ourselves, that South Africa is a progressive, inclusive nation. It's not. It's a country caught between two worlds, pretending to embrace both while committing to neither. Useless, useless. And until we stop pretending, until we face the hard truths about who we are and what we really stand for, tragedies like this will just keep on happening. Because silence isn't just passive, it's permission. So to the leaders, the influencers, the community figures staying quiet right now, just admit it, will you? Admit that you never truly supported Hendricks. I knew it. Admit that you're more worried about keeping the peace in your reputations than for standing for what he thought was right. Because at least then we'd be dealing with honesty instead of hypocrisy. Just admit it. You're not woke. You never were. You didn't support Hendricks. As a Catholic, I do not support what Hendricks was doing at all. But when it comes to life and death, I don't care who stood for what. No one deserves to take your life away from you. And because the blessed government and the CRL Rights Commission themselves didn't say it, I will. On behalf of the Summer Sambit family, all my viewers and subscribers, our condolences to your family and closest of friends. And we ask you to be strong in this tough time. Again, I don't support what Mushin Hendricks was doing. In fact, I was actively and still am actively against it. But he deserved better. Even I'm human enough to know that. Or am I? But now I want to talk about the real comedy show here. The people who were screaming from the rooftops about how progressive and brave Mushin Hendricks was. You know, the ones who made threads on X, Twitter, about how he was revolutionizing Islam and breaking barriers. Those same people now, dead silent, quieter than load shedding at midnight. Where are those people now? Where are those think pieces now? The same people who wore their rainbow badges like armor and called everyone questioning Hendricks a bigot is nowhere to be found. It's like they caught amnesia overnight. Are their keyboards broken? Is the Wi-Fi down? Or did reality slap them so hard they decided to sit this one out? Here's the thing. You can't claim to support someone when they're trending and then go full ghost when things get uncomfortable. That's not allyship, that's clout chasing. Mushin Hendricks was your poster boy for progress, but now that he's gone and has suffered in the most brutal way, everyone is acting like they never knew him in the first place. Even the media is keeping it light. No primetime debates, no passionate speeches from the same activists who were supporting him, no hashtags flooding timelines. If this was a Western country, CNN would already have 3 documentaries and Netflix would be editing a Courage of Faith miniseries. But here, crickets, nothing. So what does that say? It says the support was performative. It was never about Hendricks. It was about looking progressive. Because when it really matters, when justice should be condemned, when questions should have been asked, everyone was suddenly losing their voice. And don't even get me started on the politicians. The same ones who preach about South Africa being an inclusive democracy are acting like this never happened. Cyril Ramaphosa spoke about LGBTQ+ rights during elections. Where is he now? He's probably practicing his no comment face in the mirror. If you're going to support someone for standing against the tide, at least have the spine to back them up when the tide turns deadly. That's the definition of supporter. Otherwise, don't pretend you cared in the first place. Remember those influencers, the ones who suddenly became activists the moment Mushin Hendricks' name hit the headlines. The ones who were posting aesthetic Instagram stories with the rainbow-colored Quran verses. Yes, those guys. Where's the energy now? Where are those people now? You were bold enough to call him a hero last week, but when he's died, suddenly you can't find your phone when it's time to ask who killed him. It's funny. It's really funny how people are activists when it's safe. When it gets messy, when the conversation gets uncomfortable, everyone turns into a mime. Silent, expressionless, pretending they didn't see the news. Imagine if it was some Western activist who got attacked. There'd be petitions with 500,000 signatures already. Spotify would have a whole Justice for Mushin playlist. But because it's South Africa, because it's religion, because it's complicated over here, everyone suddenly turns into an I don't want to get involved type of guy. Where's the Parliament of World Religions now? Weren't they the same people celebrating diversity and inclusion a few months ago? Now that one of their own got taken out, they're moving like they're in witness protection. Ramaphosa, 2. Religious leaders, 2. Human rights organizations, 2. If you claim to be about freedom and equality, you can't pick and choose when you apply it. That's like a vegan saying I only eat meat when no one's watching. Bruv, get real. Let's not ignore the influencer hypocrisy either, because some of these people who praised Mushin Hendricks are the same ones who wouldn't dare criticize conservative Muslim communities. They're gonna post rainbow flags all day, but suddenly lose their passwords when it's time to talk about what happened to him. It's easy to support the underdog when there's no risk. But when that support could get you unfollowed by the traditional crowd, silence. Imagine if someone like Trevor Noah spoke out. It would trend worldwide. But he wouldn't. He won't. Because it's easier to make jokes about politicians than to touch religious controversy. Here's the truth most people won't admit. Supporting Mushin Hendricks was trendy. It made people look woke, progressive, and brave. Yay! But the moment real bravery was required, the kind that risks backlash, everyone all of a sudden backed off. Why? Because they never cared about him. They never cared. They only cared about looking good. So if you're only an ally that's there when it's easy, you're not an ally, you're just a clout chaser, and South Africa is full of them. If you ever supported Mushin Hendricks, this was the time to prove it, brother. If you're quiet now, don't ever post another rainbow flag Quran verse again. Either stand by your beliefs, even when it's uncomfortable, or just admit you were there for the likes, you hypocritical moron. Because right now, the silence is louder than any support ever was.